Welcome to another spine-chilling episode of Unexplained Haunts, where tonight we'll journey through 9 of the most haunting encounters ever shared on this channel. These aren't stories conjured from imagination. They're real experiences that have forever changed the lives of those who lived them. Some of our viewers have carried these supernatural burdens for years, sometimes decades, before finding the courage to share them with us. What you're about to hear might challenge everything you believe about our reality, from entities that follow their chosen targets across continents. To shadow beings that lurk in the corners of ordinary homes. These accounts will make you question the thin veil between our world and whatever lies beyond. So dim your lights, find a comfortable spot, and prepare yourself. Because once you hear these stories, you might start noticing things in your own home that you've been trying to ignore all along. Our first story comes from Sarah, who's been carrying this burden since she was 10 years old. What makes her account particularly chilling isn't just the initial encounter. It's how the entity has followed her across countries, growing stronger and more persistent with each passing year. It began on an ordinary afternoon walk with her father through a wooded area near their local dog park. The autumn air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet when they both saw something that would haunt Sarah for years to come. There, perched on a fallen tree, sat a young boy. He looked like he belonged in the 1980s. Fiery red hair, a bright red t-shirt, pleated blue jeans, and red Converse shoes. But something was off about him. The moment that seared into my memory, Sarah writes, is when he jumped off that log. We heard the sound of his feet hitting the ground, heard the rustling of leaves as he supposedly ran away, but we never actually saw him make contact with the earth. He just disappeared. My father and I stood there in stunned silence, both trying to process what we'd just witnessed. This encounter was just the beginning. As Sarah entered her early teens, the supernatural activity in her life intensified. She would wake in the middle of the night to find her hands mysteriously floating, held by invisible hands that existed in a state between temperatures, neither warm nor cold, lacking texture, yet undeniably present. The sensation would last for minutes, leaving her paralyzed with fear. By her mid-teens, the entity had grown bolder. Footsteps would echo through her room at night, always following the same path. Her dresser drawers would open in a specific sequence, as if something was searching for something, or perhaps just trying to let her know it was there. Then came the touching, light brushes against her arm or leg in the darkness, always when she was alone. But what truly convinced Sarah that she was dealing with something beyond the ordinary was what happened after her family moved to the United Kingdom. The entity, whatever it was, followed her across the Atlantic. In their new home, her younger brother, Tommy, who has Asperger's syndrome, had a terrifying encounter that left him sleeping with the lights on for weeks. Tommy came running into my room one night, Sarah recalls, white as a sheet. He said he'd seen me standing in his doorway, laughing in a way that wasn't natural. The problem was, I'd been in my room the entire time, working on homework. Whatever this thing is, it had learned to mimic my appearance. The activity has continued into Sarah's adult life. Objects move when she's alone. Doors open and close on their own. And sometimes, in the dead of night, she still feels those temperatureless hands holding hers. I've learned to live with it, she writes. But I often wonder, am I being followed? Or is this thing actually attached to me? And more importantly, what does it want? Sarah's story serves as a chilling reminder that some supernatural entities aren't bound by physical locations. They're bound to the people they choose to haunt. And once they've chosen you, geographic boundaries mean nothing to them. If Sarah's story has left you unsettled, what you're about to hear next might challenge your very understanding of reality. Our second account comes from someone who spent their entire life as a steadfast skeptic. Someone who believed every supernatural occurrence had a logical explanation, until they didn't. This is the story of a series of events that transformed a rational mind into one that questions everything. A journey that begins with a grandfather's inexplicable premonition and ends with unexplainable marks appearing on human skin. Sometimes, the most compelling evidence comes to those who never believed in the first place. Raj describes himself as someone who always sought logical explanations. As a software engineer in Bangalore, his world revolved around algorithms, data, and provable facts. But a series of events spanning 3 countries would shake the very foundation of his rational worldview. It began with his grandfather, a man of routine and predictability. My grandfather never made impulsive decisions, Raj writes. So when he suddenly insisted on returning to his hometown with an inexplicable urgency, it caught everyone off guard. There was no logical reason for his insistence. He was healthy, and nothing special was happening in his hometown. Within days of arriving in his hometown, his grandfather suffered a severe hemorrhage. As he lay on his deathbed, something occurred that would become the first crack in Raj's skeptical armor. During the traditional Hindu ritual of administering holy water from the Ganges, tears began streaming from his grandfather's eyes, despite the fact that medical professionals had confirmed he had no pulse. I tried to rationalize it. Raj recalls, maybe it was residual muscle movement, perhaps some chemical reaction. But what happened next defied all logical explanation. Back in Bangalore, days after the funeral, Raj felt an inexplicable compulsion to sit on his grandfather's bed. The moment he did, an overwhelming wave of sadness washed over him, followed by what he describes as a sudden lightening of the atmosphere, as if something heavy had lifted. It felt like someone saying goodbye, he writes. I could almost feel his presence leaving the room. But this was just the beginning of Raj's journey into the unexplainable. Years later, while studying in Singapore, he participated in a Ouija board session, more out of curiosity than belief. During the session, he entered an inexplicable trance-like state that his friends later described as deeply unsettling. The spirit that communicated through the board identified itself with the letter V. Weeks later, I learned about Vivek, Raj continues. He was a young man who had committed suicide in that very building years ago. I hadn't known this before the Ouija session. None of us had. When I researched local news archives, I found his story. The details matched exactly what the board had revealed. The final incident that completely shattered Raj's skepticism occurred in his Singapore apartment. After a particularly frustrating day of failed experiments at work, he issued a challenge to any spirits present. "If you're real," he declared aloud, "prove it. Show me something I can't explain away." The next morning, he woke to find mysterious marks on his face. Marks that perfectly matched the pattern of a handprint. I spent hours trying to recreate those marks. He writes, "I tried sleeping in different position, tested various objects that might have pressed against my face during the night. Nothing could explain the precise pattern of those marks." What makes Raj's account particularly compelling is his systematic approach to each experience. He documented everything, attempted to recreate conditions, and sought alternative explanations. "I still consider myself a skeptic," he concludes. "But now I'm a skeptic who accepts that some things in this universe simply defy our current understanding of reality." The line between paranormal experiences and coincidences isn't as clear as I once believed. These events transformed Raj from someone who dismissed supernatural claims to someone who questions the very nature of reality. His story reminds us that sometimes the most convincing paranormal accounts come from those who initially refuse to believe. They say bad things come in threes: 3 knocks, 3 warnings, 3 chances. Our next story proves that sometimes the most terrifying things follow a pattern. A pattern that started with 3 distinct knocks in the dead of night and evolved into something far more sinister. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of mysterious sounds in the dark. It's an account of an entity that grew bolder over time, graduating from audible warnings to physical manifestations that left permanent marks. And just when our next witness thought they understood the pattern, something new emerged, something that defied all expectations. Maria's story begins in the quiet suburbs of Kissimmee, Florida, where the rhythm of 3 knocks would become the harbinger of increasingly disturbing phenomena. It always started the same way. She writes, 3 distinct knocks, perfectly spaced, like someone keeping time to an unheard melody. But the source? That was impossible to pin down. These knocks would echo through her house at various times, but most often in those liminal hours between 2 and 4 a.m. Sometimes they seemed to come from the windows, other times from the doors, and occasionally from walls where no one could possibly be standing. "I tried everything to explain them," Maria recalls. "I checked for loose shutters, tree branches, even animals that might be causing the sounds. But the rhythm was too perfect, too deliberate to be random." The pattern continued for months until her family moved to St. Cloud, Florida. That's when things took a darker turn. One morning, Maria woke to find deep scratch marks on her inner thigh, marks that would inexplicably persist for 9 months. I tried to rationalize it. She writes, "Maybe I had scratched myself in my sleep, but when I attempted to recreate the marks, I found it physically impossible. The angle and depth couldn't be self-inflicted, and they were in a location I couldn't reach naturally while sleeping." The activity followed her to Louisville, Kentucky, where it evolved into something more physically assertive. The most dramatic incident occurred during a normal workday. I was standing about 2 feet away from my desk, Maria describes, when it literally lifted an inch off the ground and dropped back down. There was a water bottle on the desk that was still moving when I rushed over to check. I wasn't just seeing things. This was real, physical movement. But the entity wasn't done. Objects began disappearing from one room only to appear in another, often in impossible positions. Electronics would malfunction in specific patterns. 3 power surges, 3 TV glitches, 3 computer crashes. The number 3 became a recurring theme in every manifestation. The most terrifying aspect wasn't the phenomena themselves, Maria confesses. It was the growing sense that whatever was causing them was intelligent and methodical. It wasn't just haunting my home. It was communicating, establishing patterns, maybe even testing boundaries. The activity reached its peak during a particularly active week when the 3 knocks evolved into something new. Instead of their usual rhythm, they began to sound like someone running their knuckles along the walls, creating a scraping melody that would last for minutes. The sound would start in one room and travel through the house. Maria writes, "It was like whatever this thing was, it had learned new ways to announce its presence." One night, after a particularly intense session of knocking, Maria finally broke her silence and spoke to the entity. I asked it what it wanted. She recalls. The knocking stopped immediately, and the room went cold, so cold I could see my breath. That's when I heard it. Not knocks this time, but 3 distinct footsteps walking away from me, each one lighter than the last, until they faded into silence. To this day, Maria still experiences occasional manifestations, though less frequently than before. Sometimes I wonder if acknowledging it that night changed something. She reflects, "The 3 knocks still come, but they're different now, almost like a greeting rather than a warning. I've learned to live with it, but I never let my guard down. Because whatever this entity is, it's proven it can change and adapt. And that's what truly terrifies me." Sometimes, the supernatural doesn't announce itself with dramatic flair or terrifying encounters. Sometimes, it whispers through the ordinary moments of our lives, leaving us with fragments of experiences that don't quite fit into neat categories. Our next witness brings us a collection of such moments, brief glimpses through the veil that separates our world from whatever lies beyond. From an inexplicable out-of-body experience as a child to mysterious photographs that defy explanation, these seemingly disconnected encounters paint a larger picture of a reality far stranger than we imagine. As As we delve into these varied experiences, ask yourself, how many similar moments have you dismissed in your own life simply because they didn't fit into your understanding of what's possible? Alex's collection of supernatural encounters begins with a memory that has stayed crystal clear despite the passing decades. At just 5 years old, they experienced something that most people only read about in metaphysical books: a spontaneous, out-of-body experience. I remember the strangest sensation. Alex writes, "One moment, I was sitting on my bedroom floor playing with Legos, and the next, I was watching myself from above, floating near the ceiling. I could see every detail, the way my hands moved the blocks, the pattern of my pajamas, even the slight tilt of my head as I concentrated on building. The experience lasted only minutes, but ended with a jarring return to their physical form. It felt like being suddenly dropped back into cold water," they recall. "The sensation was so intense, it made me nauseous. I tried telling my parents, but how do you explain something like that when you're 5? This early glimpse beyond the veil seemed to open a door that never fully closed. Throughout their teenage years, Alex would occasionally catch glimpses of what they describe as people out of time. Figures in period clothing who appeared solid at first glance, but revealed their true nature upon closer inspection. The women were always more detailed than the men," Alex notes. "You could see every ruffle in their dresses, every fold in their shawls. The men were more like sketches, basic outlines with missing details. Sometimes they'd be missing hands or feet, but they moved as if they were complete." These encounters took an interesting turn during a photography project at Rockville Cemetery. Armed with a film camera for a school assignment on historical architecture, Alex set out to capture images of the cemetery's oldest headstones. "When I got the film developed, something impossible appeared in the photos. Every single shot of the cemetery was obscured by white, perfectly round orbs. They weren't lens flares or dust spots. They appeared consistently in the same places when I took multiple shots of the same headstone. What makes this incident particularly compelling is that only the cemetery photos were affected. The rest of the roll was fine," Alex explains. "I had shots of the school, my friends, random buildings, all perfectly normal. Just the cemetery photos had these unexplainable orbs." As an adult, Alex's experiences have evolved into what they believe are glimpses of residual hauntings, moments when the past seems to replay itself in fragments. "I'll be walking down a street and suddenly see a horse-drawn carriage pass by, or catch a glimpse of children in Victorian clothing playing with hoops. They're like echoes of the past, bleeding through into our present." One of the most striking incidents occurred during a renovation project in their historic home. "We were removing old wallpaper when I saw a young woman in a blue dress walk through the wall where a doorway used to be. I later found architectural plans from 1890 that showed there had indeed been a door exactly where she passed through." These various encounters, while different in nature, share a common thread. They challenge our understanding of time and space as linear concepts. I've stopped trying to explain these experiences, Alex concludes. Instead, I've learned to accept them as glimpses of a reality that's far more complex than we imagine. Sometimes, the veil between worlds is thinner than we think, and if you're open to it, you might just catch a glimpse of what lies beyond. We've heard stories of entities that follow, spirits that linger, and glimpses of other realities. But what happens when something far more sinister takes an interest in you? Our next account takes us into darker territory. A 13-year journey with an entity that towers over 8 feet tall. An encounter that began in childhood and evolved into something that defies conventional paranormal classification. Some beings don't just haunt places or people. They seem to feed on fear itself. And as you're about to hear, sometimes knowing what these entities want might be more terrifying than not knowing at all. Jordan was 12 when the static figure first appeared, standing 5 feet tall. It loomed in the corner of their bedroom, a mass of television-like static in the vague shape of a person. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, Jordan writes, but night after night, it returned, always in the same spot, always watching. Within months, the static figure evolved into something more sinister, a shadow being that seemed to possess both intelligence and purpose. What started as silent observation turned into what Jordan describes as psychological warfare. The entity would manifest during moments of vulnerability, particularly during episodes of sleep paralysis. It knew exactly what it was doing, Jordan recalls. It would wait until I was trapped between sleep and wakefulness, unable to move, before making its presence known. The terror it induced wasn't natural. It was calculated, almost savored. For 4 years, these encounters occurred weekly, following a pattern that suggested deliberate intent. The entity seemed to feed off fear, growing stronger and more bold with each manifestation. By age 16, Jordan had developed severe insomnia, afraid to sleep in their own room. But the worst was yet to come. At 17, the single entity multiplied into 7 distinct figures, distorted, twisted forms that called themselves the relatives. They would appear simultaneously, Jordan writes, each one more grotesque than the last. They moved in ways that defied physics, bending and contorting in impossible angles. Desperate for answers, Jordan sought medical help. Multiple psychiatrists and psychologists evaluated them, running tests for everything from schizophrenia to temporal lobe epilepsy. Every test came back normal. Jordan notes, brain scans, sleep studies, psychological evaluations. There was no medical explanation for what I was experiencing. The encounters grew more intense in their early 20s. The entities began appearing in mirrors, their reflections visible even when Jordan wasn't looking directly at them. They would whisper in languages that seemed ancient, yet somehow comprehensible on a primal level. The most disturbing development was the appearance of what Jordan calls the Orchestrator, a pale, humanoid figure with burned-out eyes that claimed to control the other entities. It spoke directly to me. Jordan remembers, not in words, but in thoughts that felt like ice being pushed into my brain. It said it had been watching our family for generations, waiting for someone sensitive enough to perceive it. The psychological toll became unbearable. At 25, Jordan attempted suicide, unable to cope with the constant supernatural harassment. The hospital stay actually provided a brief reprieve. They write, "The entities never appeared in places with multiple people. It was like they needed isolation to manifest." Today, at 30, Jordan has learned to live with these unwanted visitors, but questions remain. "I'd like to know what it wants," they conclude. Why me? Why our family? What's the purpose of this decades-long torment? Sometimes I think knowing would help me cope better, but other times, I fear knowing the truth might be worse than the uncertainty. If you thought our previous account was dark, prepare yourself for what comes next. Some hauntings last for years, others for decades. But our next witness has endured something far worse, a lifetime of supernatural torment that began before they could even speak. What you're about to hear isn't just another ghost story. It's a chronicle of survival, a testimony of human endurance in the face of relentless supernatural assault. When your earliest memories are of things that shouldn't exist, and every day brings new horrors, how do you maintain your grip on reality? How do you build a life in the shadows of entities that never leave? Emma's first memory isn't of a loving parent or a favorite toy. It's of the thing that stood beside her crib. "I couldn't have been more than 2, she begins, but I remember those yellow eyes looking down at me, and the way its long, spindly fingers would reach toward my face." This would become the first chapter in what Emma describes as her life of hell, a continuous existence alongside entities that most people only encounter in their worst nightmares. Throughout her childhood, these beings were her constant, unwanted companions. "My parents thought I had an overactive imagination," she writes, "when I screamed about the woman with backwards feet walking across my ceiling. Or the child with black holes for eyes who would stand in my doorway." They assumed it was just normal childhood fears. But these things were as real as the furniture in my room. The entities would follow specific patterns. The yellow-eyed creature always appeared at bedtime, standing in the same corner, watching. The backwards walking woman would only appear during thunderstorms, making her way across the ceiling in a horrifying, spider-like crawl. The child with void-like eyes seemed to appear randomly, but always brought with it a suffocating sense of dread. By age 7, Emma had developed complex rituals to cope with her supernatural tormentors. I would arrange my stuffed animals in specific patterns that I somehow knew would keep certain entities at bay. I had to say specific phrases before entering or leaving rooms. Breaking these rituals would result in increased activity. The teenage years brought new horrors. The entities began to physically interact with her world. They would move my possessions, destroy my homework, and leave scratches on my arms while I slept. One particularly malevolent being would whisper my secrets to my friends, things no one else could possibly know. School became nearly impossible. How do you focus on math when there's something inhuman sitting in the empty desk next to you? How do you maintain friendships when your supernatural stalkers make themselves known during sleepovers, sending your friends running home in terror? The worst part wasn't the entities themselves. Emma reveals, it was the isolation. No one believed me. Therapists diagnosed me with everything from anxiety to schizophrenia, but no medication ever made these beings disappear. They were real, and they were ruining my life. The turning point came when Emma met an elderly woman who recognized the signs. This woman, a practitioner of indigenous spiritual traditions, taught Emma protection rituals and methods to establish boundaries with the supernatural world. She couldn't make them go away completely, Emma explains, but she helped me understand that I wasn't crazy and that there were ways to cope. Today, at 35, Emma still lives with her unwanted visitors, but she's learned to establish a kind of uneasy coexistence. They're still here, she writes, but now I understand that they can't actually harm me unless I let them. The yellow-eyed one still watches me sleep sometimes. The ceiling walker still appears during storms, but they no longer control my life. Her story serves as both a warning and a beacon of hope for others experiencing similar torment. Living with constant supernatural activity isn't just about survival. She concludes, it's about learning to reclaim your life, even when sharing it with things that shouldn't exist. This is my normal, my reality. It's a life of hell, but it's my life, and I've learned to live it. They say closets are just empty spaces where we store our belongings. But what if that space isn't as empty as we think? What if something has been living there, watching us through the slats in the door, waiting for the perfect moment to make its presence known? Our next witness brings us a tale that will forever change how you view these seemingly innocent storage spaces. It's a reminder that sometimes the monsters aren't under the bed. They're hanging right there among your clothes, patient and persistent, biding their time until the perfect moment to reveal themselves. Michael never gave much thought to his closets until he moved into his new apartment in Boston's historic South End. The closets in this place were different, he writes. They were these deep, Victorian-era built-ins with ornate wooden doors. Beautiful, really. At least, they were beautiful until I realized what was living inside them. It started with small things. Clothes that weren't quite where he'd left them. Hangers that would be turned around when he opened the doors in the morning. I rationalized it at first, Michael recalls. Maybe the building was settling, causing things to shift. Maybe I was more disorganized than I thought. But then came the sounds. Soft at first, barely noticeable. A gentle rustling that could have been fabric settling or hangers sliding against the rod. But it evolved into something more deliberate. It sounded like something running its fingers along the walls inside the closet, he describes. And it always happened when I was alone in the room, never when I had company over. The first true sighting occurred 3 months after moving in. Michael was getting ready for bed when he noticed something odd about his closet door. There was a gap between the door and the frame, maybe half an inch wide, and in that gap, I saw fingers. Not human fingers. They were too long, too pale, with too many joints. They were curled around the edge of the door, just holding on. When he tried to investigate, the fingers withdrew, and the door wouldn't open despite his efforts. But the next morning, it opened easily, revealing nothing unusual, except for 5 distinct indentations in the wood where those fingers had gripped. The entity became bolder over time. It started moving between closets, Michael explains. I'd hear movement in the bedroom closet, open it to find nothing, then hear the same sounds coming from the hallway closet. It was like it was playing some twisted game of hide and seek. One night, while retrieving a coat, Michael came face to face with the being. It was crouched in the corner, folded in on itself in a way that shouldn't have been physically possible. Its skin was like old parchment, stretched too tight over a frame that was all angles and joints. But its eyes, they were surprisingly human, and they looked at me with what I can only describe as recognition. Instead of fleeing, the entity unfurled itself, reaching its full height, which Michael estimates was well over 7 feet. It didn't attack me, he notes. It just stood there, swaying slightly, as if waiting for something. Then it smiled, revealing teeth that looked like broken piano keys, and slowly folded itself back into impossible angles until it disappeared into the shadows. The encounters continued, establishing a bizarre routine. The being would appear periodically, always in different closets, always maintaining that same eerily patient demeanor. It's like it's studying me, Michael writes. Sometimes I'll catch it mimicking my movements or arranging my clothes in patterns that almost make sense, but not quite. Most disturbing are the gifts it leaves. Small objects that Michael knows weren't there before. Buttons that don't match any of my clothes. Old photographs of people I don't recognize. Tiny bones that look human but are too small to be adult-sized. Once, I found a child's diary from 1892, but all the pages were blank except for one that just had my name written over and over. Today, Michael still lives in the apartment, having reached an uneasy truce with his closet-dwelling companion. Moving isn't an option, he explains. Something tells me it would follow me anyway, so we coexist. I pretend not to notice when it rearranges my shoes or leaves its strange gifts. And it pretends not to notice when I quickly grab my clothes and shut the door. It's not ideal, but it's become my normal. What if everything we think we know about supernatural entities and extraterrestrial visitors is connected? Our next account challenges the boundaries between religious demonology and UFO phenomena, suggesting a disturbing possibility that what we call demons and what we call aliens might be different manifestations of the same entities. From the depths of an abandoned church to the mysterious lights in the sky above it, this witness's experience forces us to question whether the ancient texts warning of demons and the modern reports of alien encounters might be telling the same story through different lenses. What follows is an account that bridges centuries of human experience with the unknown. Father David McKenna's encounter with the unknown began in the abandoned Eldridge Street Church, where he was documenting artifacts for the diocese archives. I've spent my life studying religious texts and demonology, he writes, but nothing in my studies prepared me for what I discovered that night. The church, scheduled for demolition, held secrets in its century-old basement. While photographing ancient texts, Father McKenna noticed unusual symbols carved into the foundation stones. Symbols that appeared neither completely religious nor entirely alien in nature. These markings combined elements of ancient Sumerian cuneiform with what looked like mathematical equations. He explains, but what struck me most was their similarity to symbols I'd seen in modern UFO reports. The same geometric patterns that witnesses claim to see on unidentified crafts. As he documented these findings, the first anomaly occurred. His camera's digital display began showing images that weren't there in reality. Figures that seemed to shift between angelic and alien forms. They appeared as traditional angels one moment, with wings and halos, then transformed into what we'd now describe as gray aliens the next. The transformation was seamless, as if they were two aspects of the same entity. The phenomenon escalated when he discovered a hidden chamber behind the altar. The room was small, maybe 888 feet, but the walls were covered in the same hybrid symbols. As I examined them, the temperature dropped dramatically, and I experienced what I can only describe as temporal displacement. In this altered state, Father McKenna witnessed what he believes was the church's true purpose. It wasn't just a place of worship, it was a monitoring station. The beings I saw moved between dimensions, using the sacred space as a gateway. They appeared as angels to the congregation in 1892, as demons to those who feared them, and as extraterrestrials to modern observers. The most compelling evidence came from the church's historical records. I found accounts of visitations spanning from 1891 to 1956. Early descriptions match classical religious encounters, angels descending in pillars of light, demons testing the faithful. But as the decades progressed, the same phenomena were described in increasingly technological terms. During his investigation, Father McKenna experienced both traditional supernatural and UFO phenomena simultaneously. There were moments when I'd hear Gregorian chants while watching what appeared to be a UFO hovering above the church. The beings would shift forms based on my expectations, appearing angelic when I prayed, alien when I thought about UFOs. The experience forced him to reconsider everything he'd studied about religious encounters. What if our ancestors, lacking our technological framework, interpreted these entities through a religious lens? What if modern humans, immersed in science fiction, see the same beings, but interpret them as extraterrestrial? His research has led him to a controversial hypothesis that demons, angels, and aliens might be the same entities, presenting themselves differently based on humanity's evolving beliefs and understanding. These beings seem to adapt to our cultural framework, he suggests. They're like actors changing costumes to match their audience's expectations. The Eldridge Street Church was demolished in 2019, but Father McKenna's questions remain. We're not dealing with separate phenomena, he concludes. Whether we call them demons, angels, or aliens, we're encountering the same entities we've always encountered. Only our interpretation has changed with time. Not all supernatural entities announce themselves with terror and dread. Sometimes they come wearing friendly faces, bearing gifts of comfort and protection. Our final story introduces us to a family who grew up with otherworldly guardians, beings that have watched over generations, becoming as familiar as relatives. But as you're about to discover, even the most benevolent supernatural relationships can hide darker truths. When entities become part of the family tree, the line between protection and possession becomes dangerously thin. The Richardson family never felt alone in their sprawling Victorian home, not with their special friends always watching. For 4 generations, these entities have been constant companions, appearing at births, celebrations, and times of crisis. They've been with us since my great-grandmother's time. Katherine Richardson writes, "We grew up knowing they were there, accepting their presence as naturally as one accepts having aunts or uncles. Each family member sees them differently, but we all feel their protection." The entities first appeared during a family tragedy in 1923, when Katherine's great-grandmother lost 2 children to influenza. In her deepest grief, she began seeing what she described as light beings around her surviving infant, forms that seemed to cradle and comfort the child. These beings stayed, becoming more visible and interactive with each generation. My grandmother saw them as tall, elegant figures in Victorian clothing, Katherine explains. My mother perceives them as beings of pure light. I see them as something between the two, semi-transparent forms that seem to shift between human and pure energy. What makes the Richardson case unique is the entity's involvement in family decisions. They've developed methods of communication, from moving objects to arrange answers to questions, to appearing in dreams with warnings or advice. They've prevented family members from taking flights that later crashed, Katherine notes. They've guided us away from dangerous relationships and toward beneficial ones. But their influence goes deeper than mere protection. Every Richardson child is born with a birthmark in the shape of 3 interconnected circles. Katherine reveals, the marks appear in slightly different locations, but the pattern is identical. Medical experts have no explanation for this. The entity's presence becomes particularly strong around pregnant family members. They gather around the mother months before birth, as if preparing for the new arrival. During labor, many of our women report seeing the delivery room filled with these beings, all focused on the baby. However, this seemingly benevolent relationship has its darker aspects. Family members who try to leave the ancestral home for too long become ill. Potential spouses who don't meet with approval find themselves driven away by unexplainable events. The entity's protection, it seems, comes with golden handcuffs. We've come to understand that we're as much theirs as they are ours. Katherine concludes, they're not just our family friends. They're our guardians, our wardens, and perhaps our creators in some way we don't fully understand. The price of their protection is our acceptance of their control. 9 stories, 9 glimpses into the unknown, 9 reminders that reality is far stranger than we imagine. From entities that follow us across continents to beings that become part of our family legacy, these accounts challenge our understanding of what's possible. But these stories aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be shared. Because somewhere out there, someone is experiencing something they can't explain, feeling alone in their supernatural encounter. Your story could be the beacon of hope they need, the validation that they're not crazy, not alone. Have you experienced something you can't explain? Something that defies rational understanding? Something that keeps you awake at night, wondering if anyone would believe you? The comments section below is your safe space to share. Hit that like button if these stories resonated with you. Share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their experiences. Subscribe and ring that notification bell to join our growing community of witnesses to the unexplained. And remember, just because something can't be explained doesn't mean it isn't real. Keep watching, keep questioning, and keep sharing your stories. Until next time, this is Unexplained Haunts, where your stories become part of our collective journey into the unknown.